hope this is going to take me where I want to go. At 26th and Marshall, and the street just kind of ends and starts going down, which I don't want to do. My hope is if I go up this, that it will bring me to Cornell Road. There's a gated door, but that's open. Oh Lord Almighty, this is gonna kill my legs. I'm not ready for this kind of physical activity, but I'm trying to get to Cornell Road specifically. And I'm pretty sure it's like one of the only roads that's up here. Yes, I believe that sign says Cornell Road. Please, oh, this is pretty. Should plant a tree here. There probably was at one time. Oh my God, I'm gonna need to catch my breath. Yes, this does take me to Cornell Road. Good, because that's where I wanted to be. Holy moly, what a way to get here though. Well, I guess I'm glad that was there. Yep, here I am. Cornell Road. Whew. Holy bejeepers. Glad that was there, but I'm winded now. Anyway, I'm going a little ways down Cornell Road, which is like the only road in this area that really gets you over the hills to the other side and like into Beaverton. I don't think there's really any other roads around here that do that. They all kind of go up into the hills and die. But not this one. This one goes through. So anyway, I'm trying to get generally to the vicinity of 30th and Cornell. Generally speaking, because I'm kind of having to kind of estimate based on information. But that's where I'm headed to get us going in a fresh new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. So, as I climb Cornell Road and marvel at the beauties, whoa, and the broken sidewalks, so I'm looking for the general location of where the home would have been of a man named Alex Huber. Alex Huber, Huber. His home, as it was reported in newspapers, was approximately half a mile up from the Cornell Lovejoy intersection. Essentially what happens is Lovejoy travels east and west, and then around 25th, like Northwest 25th Avenue, it starts, get out of my face, bug! It turns sharply and Lovejoy becomes Cornell Road. So he said it was about a half a mile up from that, which when I measured that on Google Maps, it put me in the vicinity of Cornell and 30th. So that's approximately where Alex Huber lived. And Alex Huber was a milkman who'd been, it seems, hanging out in the city on the evening of July 16th, 1907. So this is where all these scooters come to die. But more specifically, we are at the NATO Parkway in Salmon now, but this would have been Front and Salmon back in 1907. And the last time that Alex Huber was seen alive, he'd actually been at two different saloons that night. He liked to go to saloons, like, you know, let the guy live his life. He was at one block down, right over here, and he had some drinks, and then he came over here to this intersection, and he had some drinks here, and he was reportedly at the saloon that was at this intersection. We're a long ways from where he lived, but he would have been at a saloon at this intersection, and he left at approximately 10 p.m. And when he left this saloon, that was the last time he was seen alive. So, arguably sometime after 10 p.m. When he's last seen, and he's down in downtown Portland. If he was walking, I don't know if he walked, caught a streetcar, or what exactly, but if he walked on foot from way down there at the waterfront up to here, it would probably take at least 30 minutes. And that's for someone who walks fast like me. I mean, it would probably be even further. It would probably be more like 40 minutes. But it suggests that Huber was, that night, you know, as the 16th is starting to turn towards the 17th, it's most likely he would have been walking the same direction I am if he lived up here a little bit and he was coming from downtown Portland by the waterfront way back over here. This is the only road that comes up through here that can get you here, so he was probably walking up this road. And it was described as kind of a dark, lonely path that he walked. Maybe just this, you know, there were homes up here, but yeah, look at how high up we are. There's the Montgomery Park building where I had my horrible prom experience. And yeah, you can see off, there's Mount St. Helens in the distance, so, you know, downtown Portland where he was would have been more level with the land way down there, so he was really climbing up here. And logistically, they don't describe exactly where he was found next, except that he was on his way home, and by their description, his home was near 30th and Cornell, which I believe is right around this corner up here. And from that corner, Cornell wraps up to here and comes to a three-way, I think it's a three-way intersection, where it continues off in a western direction. And this right here would have been the general area, you know, give or take a block, where Alex Huber lived and no doubt was on his way home to, again, during the waning hours of July 16th, 1907. He would have lived right around here. I wish I could lay down a solid guess as to where exactly, but I'm just predicting. Guarantee there wasn't as much traffic in this area. I mean, it was 1907, and he was out here all by himself. And as you can see, it starts getting a little bit more treacherous the further up you go. I'm just past that general spot where approximately Alex Huber would have lived, but newspapers get it wrong a lot. They'll say it was a half a mile away, a full mile away. The fact that they say it was a very lonely stretch, a very lonely path, and some of those houses right back there definitely were around in 1907. I almost wonder if his home was maybe a little bit further. Like, there's still homes down there, but it was maybe a little bit further up here where, you know, this is kind of Maclay Park we're coming up on. And yeah, there's two tunnels that Cornell Road goes through up here, and I get the feeling, because it is even to this day a little bit more open, that this was more the general area where Alex Huber would have been living and where he would have been heading to. And here we are up ahead in the darkness, the first of two tunnels that were burrowed into the West Hill so that Cornell Road could go through here. It's pretty much the primary reason that this road, unlike so many other roads, actually can get through the West Hills this far north and to the other side towards Beaverton and all that. And it's because of these hills, or because of these tunnels. It's in spite of these hills. So this is generally, give or take, this is generally kind of sorta the area where I think Alex Huber probably was during, well, not spoil things, but during his final moments. This is a Historic Murders of Portland episode, you know. You had to know this guy was gonna get killed. And no, don't worry, I'm not walking through the tunnel on this when I can go over here. Man, after the pandemic, I've missed being out in places like this so much. I feel at home out here, kind of walking up into the West Hills. But enough nostalgia. I'm here to talk about murder. So what happened then during those waning hours of July 16th going into July, I'm having to check. July 16th going into July 17th. Well, as I said, Alex Huber was walking along a desolate, lonely stretch, just like this one I'm on right now, when it appears somebody ambushed him. Either somebody hiding in some brush like this, or somebody just came running down and shot him. For whatever circumstances, and it's interesting, none of his items were taken. This did not seem at all to be a case of robbery. Which, you know, when you ambush somebody on a lonely stretch up here, or even today, like where I'm at right now, like there's some houses around here, but it's getting a little bit more rural up in the hills. You know, it's like it's a victim of opportunity, so you'd think it would probably be a robbery, because if it's not a robbery, then what else is it? Is this just somebody who's lost his mind and he's out for kicks and he's just going around shooting any victim of opportunity? Is this a 1907 incarnation of a serial killer? Maybe, but somehow I doubt it. Or was it something more personal? Somebody knew Alex Huber, or knew enough about him that he lived in this area, and that on a given day or night he would be coming up this way, and that it would be nice and quiet and dark and late at night, and there's not going to be any witnesses around to see you shoot him dead. Whatever the case, somebody ambushed Alex Huber in this general area, shot him twice in the back. One of the bullets ripped right through his back, out his chest. The other bullet went through the back, dislodged in the body. And he dropped dead right there. And it would be several hours. It wouldn't be till, after sunrise, July 17th, the following day, that Huber would be discovered, because again, it was so isolated and quiet, and he was right there in the middle of the path, when coincidentally a friend of his, who was also a milkman, stumbled onto his body. And this milkman friend of his was a guy named Henry Nagel, who was coming from the west. He was going the opposite direction Huber would have been going to go home, and as he was traveling west to head down into the city, because, downtown Portland's all back down there, he stumbled onto Huber's body. And by his description, I'm going to get my white shirt, my darling white shirt, a little dirty, but he was flat on his back, with his eyes just staring up at the sky. He'd been gunned down so quick. So, Nagel freaked. Probably knew he was dead, because by that point he had been dead for several hours. But he sprinted down Cornell and to Good Samaritan Hospital, which, interestingly enough, the last video I just did was about a murder case that happened at Good Samaritan Hospital. So by the time you're seeing this, you've either seen that video or haven't yet, so I won't do any spoilers. But that big staircase I went up at the start of this video, at the start of that I was at 26th and Marshall. And Good Samaritan Hospital was at 23rd and Marshall. So he could have literally backtracked the way I just went down those stairs, which probably weren't there yet, but down that hill, and just 3 blocks further down would have been where the original Good Samaritan Hospital was. He had to get all the way there, where he called the police. And they reported up here to the scene where Huber's body was still just laying there along the path, kind of on the edge of a ditch, as it was described, right along Cornell Road. Now, when the police do come up here and find Huber's body, I mean, whoever did the killing has long since been gone. By the time the police get up here, the murder is at least 10, 12, maybe even 15 hours old. So, there's no evidence of who did it. Even if you can recover the guns, or the one bullet from Huber's body, you got to find the exact gun, which means you got to pretty much find the perpetrator. So the police, once again, they're set up to have a crime that is going to be a real pain to solve, because it was way up here in the West Hills. This isn't where murders happen. There's barely anybody up here. You're more likely to get murdered the more people you're around, because the more people you're around, the more odds there's a murderer in the mix. That's just a rule of numbers. Of course, I'm not a mathematician, so maybe I'm talking like a fool, but this was this was one of those situations where, there's barely anybody out here. There were no witnesses. Nobody heard or reported the gunshots. He was gunned down and laid here until someone stumbled onto the body. It wasn't, the police weren't reporting here because a neighbor called the police and said, "Oh, I heard gunshots up on Cornell Road." So there were no witnesses. Nobody saw the killer. Nobody saw where the killer fled. They couldn't, say, what color was the person's hair? Was it a man or a woman? Did they go north? Did they go south? There was really nothing at the start. All the police had to go on as they started investigating and were kind of struggling to try to hope that they could figure this thing out, they discovered one interesting story. And this was something that happened literally 3 days earlier while Alex Huber was obviously still alive. He'd apparently been in a pretty wild brawl at a saloon with some other guys in downtown Portland. And that is where this story gets really interesting, bizarre. Lots of great old architecture here, including a part of the building that was demolished a long time ago, but this little chunk is still here. This building may very well have been, the one that was once here. This may very well have been where the, try to pronounce this properly, the Bruelty Saloon was located. By newspaper descriptions, it was located on Yamhill Street, which is this crossing street between Front, which is now NATO Parkway, and First Avenue. Now, this is the, I never know if I'm pronouncing this right, this is the Van Rensselaer building. Beautiful, built in 1879. The building that was here was called the Wakefield, it was Wake something, the name escapes me. And right up here, this building is one of the oldest buildings in Portland, even though it's been messed with so much. So aside from this structure here, pretty much these buildings would have been around in 1907, and the building that's no longer here would have been around in 1907. So that bar could have been in any one of these, and I like the idea of thinking that it was in the Van Rensselaer, I think that's how it's pronounced, primarily because there's a bar there now. Wherever, in fact, this saloon was, apparently on July 13th, just a few days before his death, Alex Huber and two milkman friends went to this saloon and apparently encountered some like competitor milkmen, like milkmen who worked for a different company. And they're in a saloon, so of course they're getting drunk as hell, and they start like bickering with each other and arguing and fighting, and they're competing milkmen. It's just the most ridiculous concept, and things get absolutely out of control, and it becomes an all-out brawl. There's like 5 or 6 men involved, and one of the men in this mix, who's part of the company that's competing against Alex Huber's company, so this guy and Alex Huber are on opposite sides of the fence. His name is Jacob Lew. L-E-U is how you pronounce his last name. I'm not sure what nationality that is. And Jacob Lew in particular just gets the crap beat out of him. He's just getting punched at all sides. He's severely beaten. He had a spittoon chucked at him, and he got hit with a friggin' spittoon. He got all beat to hell. Like, Alex Huber's side thoroughly annihilated their competition, so to speak. And Alex Huber and his buddies get arrested. They get released on like $150 bail, which that's, you know, you're like $150, but it's also 1907. That's pretty steep. And then they're back out on the streets. So Jacob Lew kind of starts becoming an intriguing figure, because people are thinking, okay, Alex Huber and his buddies instigated this fight, and in particular Alex Huber. So does Jacob Lew have motive now to go after Alex Huber and incite revenge? I mean, he got beaten so bad. I mixed their names up. Jacob Lew could have been beaten to death that night. But he managed to escape with his life. So, did he have a reason to go after Alex Huber? And now, here's the thing about Jacob Lew is, I mean, everybody involved in the fight is taken in. Obviously, Alex Huber and his side got a little bit more of a punishment because they got more of a beating in. And apparently, Jacob Lew was brought in and released. He wasn't charged with anything. I don't know if that means he didn't really do that much in the fight, or maybe authorities just felt sorry for him. They drag him in, he's all beat to hell, he probably needs medical attention that he's not getting, and they let him go. Like, I mean, a guy gets a spittoon thrown at them, it's like, hasn't he been through enough? And so he's released. But here's the interesting thing, timing-wise. Trying to act like they fenced this off to help the grass grow. No, this was the epicenter of the protests that happened here last year. But for my sake, we're coming up to the intersection of 4th and Madison, which, interestingly enough, is where City Hall is on one side. So, this is the intersection where Jacob Lew was last seen alive, and he was also seen in a saloon. Where else would he be? So, probably not where City Hall is. This is Chapman Square. There used to be buildings here once upon a time. There used to be buildings here once upon a time. And this here is the Portland building, which I believe was built in the 80s. So, pretty much, mostly, there's nothing here that would have been here in 1907, but there was a saloon here at some point. I mean, we're not that far from the waterfront. This whole area was lined with saloons back in the day. And Jacob Lew was last seen around 1:30 p.m. July 17th. This would be in relatively close proximity to probably after Alex Huber has been discovered, but kind of in sync with when the police are first getting an investigation going, because it was probably sometime in the morning. It may have been late morning, start of the afternoon, when Huber's friend specifically found him dead on Cornell Road, runs down to Good Samaritan, calls the cops, and then they start addressing the situation. Probably the case, the fact of the matter that this, dead man had been discovered finally, probably wouldn't have started making the rounds till early afternoon, July 17th. And here we have Jacob Lew, who's seen early afternoon of July 17th at a saloon here. And then, sorry about the sun. And then he just disappeared after that. He left the saloon back there, and he was suddenly gone. Nobody could find him. So you wonder, did he start catching wind that Alex Huber's body had been found, the police were involved, an investigation had begun, and then he decided, well, the heat is on, I'm gonna have to make a run for it? Maybe, because he was gone. And the whole dynamic actually kind of shifts a little bit, because while we're starting to ponder, oh, isn't it interesting, Jacob Lew, who would maybe have reason to get vengeance on this guy, that guy turns up dead and then Jacob Lew disappears. Did he disappear because he was the guilty party and he was making a run for it? But authorities were also wondering, there was a lot of bad blood to go around after that big fight, a fight amongst milkmen. Was it possible that some of Alex Huber's friends got to this guy? Could Alex Huber's friends felt that Jacob Lew was involved with his murder, and without taking the time to assess the situation, tracked him down And were they the reason he disappeared? These questions are going around like wildfire. And the last time, you know, as Jacob Liu was leaving the saloon, he said he was going to go to the doctors to have his injuries like reassessed. And he never made it to a doctor. So what was going on here? What were happening? What was happening to people? And what's of further interest, one of Liu's friends, a guy named Adolf Schaffner, said that in the aftermath of that beating, he said that Jacob Liu was actually really kind of traumatized and ashamed by the whole thing. You know, back then, if you were a man and you got the crap beat out of you, that was a cause for shame, no matter what the circumstances were. And he said that, you know, there was kind of a change in him. He seemed depressed. He seemed despondent. He's, you know, it almost seemed like that event had, like, broken him to a degree. Now, his friend may have been exaggerating the situation, but it showed that this was a man deeply troubled by what had happened. Would that have driven him to take drastic actions or not? And here's what's interesting. And actually, some people tried to use this as like an alibi for Liu in the murder of Alex Huber. Was reportedly around 9 p.m. on July 17th, about an hour before Alex Huber is last seen. He was in the vicinity of the Riverview Cemetery, which is way on the southern edge of Portland, almost into Lake Oswego. It's, you know, several miles from where Alex Huber lived and was killed. So I'm cutting in here briefly just to make a little bit of an, not really an addendum, just to bring another piece to the story that I neglected to mention here. Now, it absolutely did say in newspapers that this encounter with Jacob Liu and these other guys trying to convince him to drop it, here's some money, let it go, occurred at about 9 p.m. Now, there were other resources that said this occurred around 11 p.m. And the inference was at least being someone made that Huber was probably killed sometime around, so like sometime between 10:45 and 11, because he was last seen leaving a saloon at 10 o'clock. And, you know, I said, while I was out walking, I said, it's probably about 35-40 minutes, according to Google Maps, to get from where that saloon was to roughly where Huber lived would take about 54-55 minutes. I'd probably lower that figure down closer to 50 because this is 1907. There was a lot fewer buildings. There was a lot more opportunities to kind of cut straight through instead of having to go around like there is today. But still, it would have probably taken him about, you know, 45-50 minutes to get from that saloon to his place. So there was kind of an inference that he was probably killed around 11. So if Jacob Liu is several miles away at about that same time, how could he be the killer? However, that's also under the presumption that Alex Huber went straight home after he left that saloon. Granted, he wasn't seen again after he left that saloon, but that does not prove that he immediately went home. And one of the articles I read that specifically said this Jacob Liu encounter with these other guys in southwest Portland occurred at about 11 p.m. also suggested that Alex Huber may have been killed closer to 1 a.m. So once again, you have like almost a 2-hour gap between when he was seen and when when Alex Huber died. You know, instead of being he's seen at 9, Huber's killed at 11, it's he's seen at 11, Huber's killed at 1. So the fact of the matter is we don't know exactly when Alex Huber was killed. So, you know, if these guys saw Jacob Liu at 9, 10, 11, 12, it doesn't necessarily prove that, you know, it was an alibi for him. It doesn't prove that he couldn't have been the killer. It would have taken him probably about, you know, probably about an hour and a half at least to walk that far, probably even a little bit more, to get from where he was to where Alex Huber died. But that's walking the whole way. He could have had a horse, he could have had a carriage, he could have had someone drive him there, or he could have at least taken a streetcar part of the way, and he could have easily been up in that area within an hour. So, did that happen? I mean, it's really hard to say, because if Jacob Liu is really thinking about killing him that night, why is he loitering somewhere else? He's not anywhere near where Alex Huber would be. But as I say that, you know, in the video that I just showed, I also make the point that could this encounter with these people have been the final catalyst Jacob Lew needed? He's already mad at Alex Huber. Was that encounter where they were like, you know what, let it go, here's some money, leave Huber alone? Could that have pushed him over the edge and he finally was like, that's it, I'm taking care of this? Gets a gun and starts trekking towards Alex Huber's place. Did he know where Alex Huber lived? We don't know, but it's certainly possible. I guess as competing milkmen. We don't know that for sure either, but that could have been a catalyst. He was planning on, he wanted to push to have further legal action taken against Alex Huber because, yeah, he was let out on bail, but they obviously still could have taken him to court and on trial for assault. And some people actually came to him, to Jacob Lew at this time, and tried to give him some money and to convince him to just kind of let the whole thing go. And he refused the money. It was like he was going to see to it that Alex Huber paid for what he'd done, but it was like he was going to pay for it through, you know, the reception of justice, through the legal system. But obviously, if he was going to see to it that happened, he would be a critical witness and all that. So his sudden and abrupt disappearance actually made it harder to make a case against Alex Huber. When your primary witness is suddenly gone, that's a pretty good chance that the guy that you want to get in trouble is going to get off, or at least get off with less punishment than he was supposed to get. So there's some, you know, there's some conflict there that makes you wonder, again, about the circumstances of how Jacob Lew disappeared. But yeah, they tried to say that was essentially an alibi for him. You know, people didn't have, you know, cars were kind of becoming a thing, but most people didn't have them yet. So he's way, like he's, you know, 3-4 miles off this way, and Alex Huber lives a few miles way off that way. How did he cover that distance in an hour? But here's the thing is, we don't know exactly when Alex Huber was killed. We know he was last seen at 10 p.m. But it would have taken him, as I said earlier, at least 30, probably more like 40 minutes to get to where he was when he died. So the earliest he could have been killed would have been around 10:45, but it could have been later. You know, it depends. Could he have gone to more places after he left this, you know, saloon where he was last seen? So realistically, if Jacob Lew was that far south of here at 9 p.m., we still don't know for certain how much time that would have given him to get up to the vicinity of Alex Huber's house to shoot him dead, if that was the case. Because, you know, that actually makes more sense. If he's going to reject this money and say, no, I don't want your money, I want Huber to pay, he rejects them, they leave, he, you know, is probably pissed about the experience, gets a gun, knows where Huber lives, treks across town, you know, maybe, you know, has a horse and buggy or a streetcar that gets him there quicker, and he's way up over here, you know, a little while on down the road with a gun, and he just decides the hell with justice, the hell with the legal system, the hell with a trial. I've been broken by this, and I'm going to take action. I didn't look like a man at that saloon when I let them beat the crap out of me. Well, I'm going to look like a man now, and I'm going to go up there and I'm going to get my vengeance by pumping a couple of rounds into the guy who's primarily responsible for what happened to me and why I feel the way I feel. That could absolutely be a valid motive for Jacob Lew. And the fact that those guys came and said, hey, let it go, here's some money, let it go, that could have been a catalyst, a trigger. You know, he could have already been thinking, hey, maybe I want to kill this guy because he's messed me up. And that moment could have been a big trigger. So he knows where Huber lives. Maybe he's planning on ambushing him at his home, and then spots him walking up the quiet path along Cornell Road, and he steps out and pumps 2 bullets into his back, flees the scene, no witnesses. Maybe that's what happened and why it happened. Still didn't explain what happened to Jacob Lew. He disappeared. Where did he go? What happened? Well, we have to go forward almost a little over 2 weeks to find the answers to that question. So it's August 4th, 1907, approximately 19 days, almost, since Alex Huber has been killed, and Jacob Lew is nowhere to be found. In the forest east of Oregon City, quite a ways south of here, the decomposing body of a man hanging from a tree was discovered by some passers-by. There was a letter in the man's pocket addressed to Jacob Lew, and upon removing him and checking on his body, it was discovered that this was the body of Jacob Lew. He had gone out to rural Oregon City and hung himself. And, there was a lot of lingering theories as to why he would do this. There was this shame over what he had gone through in terms of being beaten. They thought maybe had he been beaten so badly, especially in the head, that maybe he just, he was just in a new, different state of mind, and that drove him to suicide. Or, the theory that police wanted to work with, which was he was guilty of Alex Huber's murder, and the moment that murder came to light, he split town, and eventually, maybe from a collection of things, or maybe from the belief that he was going to get captured and imprisoned and probably put to death, and that his life was over anyway, he went to a nice, quiet spot far away from Portland and just ended his life. We'll never know exactly the reasons for it. A lot of police officers wanted to assume this was an admission of guilt. He hung himself to avoid capture and, probably conviction and execution. But there were some officers with the Portland police that didn't necessarily agree with this. But that suicide was essentially used to close the case on the Alex Huber murder, and it was presumed that Jacob Lew was his killer, of which he definitely could have been. But we'll never know for certain. So even while there were investigators with the police who directly said they weren't convinced Jacob Lew was responsible, or that his suicide was the result of escaping capture and punishment, they still kind of closed the book on the Alex Huber murder once Jacob Lew was found hanging in the forest. And that was commonplace back then. Investigative methods were a lot more primitive, and sometimes if you had someone who you were really suspicious of, if they did anything that could be used to make them look more suspicious, that would be used against them, whether there was definitive evidence of that or not. So the fact that this guy seems to have gone off and killed himself right after news of the Alex Huber murder starting to make the rounds gave the police, in terms of an investigative capacity, pretty much all they needed to say, yeah, this was him, because they were already wondering if he was guilty and that he disappeared because he was just fleeing the city, fleeing justice, when in fact, if he was fleeing, he didn't make it very far. So it's another case. Technically, it's a closed case. The police determined that they had got their man. But, thank you. But who knows? Who knows for absolute certainty? There was a lot of lingering, sorry, I'm crossing a lot of streets here. There was a lot of lingering doubt in this one. Again, even with investigators. So, if there was anything, it didn't really make the papers, and it could easily just be that, Jacob Lew became a person of interest so quickly, and then he fled, which made him look more guilty. I think any other possible motives were kind of pushed by the wayside when he came to light. So anybody else who may have possibly been involved probably wouldn't have even really been looked into and scrutinized. They almost would have gotten away with it from, pretty much the moment Jacob Lew went missing. So it's possible that someone could have done this for other reasons. Who's to say? Somebody could have had, he said Alex Huber seemed to like to brawl with people in saloons. Jacob Lew was probably not the only person he'd put in a hospital doing that, since, him and his milk buddies were a pretty aggressive group when you really get down to it. So maybe somebody else had similar issues with them. I just don't know. But with attention focused on Jacob Lew so quick, someone else could have done it, flown under the radar and completely gotten away with it, and we'd have absolutely no idea this person was even someone that we should have been thinking about. Sometimes the oddities of murder cases just shift that way. So, I don't know. I'm still kind of undecided on this one. Maybe I'll find something that'll sway me more in one direction or another. But maybe Jacob Lew did it, but I don't know if I'm fully convinced yet. And that is, as far as I know, the story of the 1907 murder of Alex Huber. A case I've been wanting to cover for a long time, but I had to go way, way up Cornell Road to do it, and I just am not there that often. So it was one of these cases that just kind of sat there waiting for a very long time to be covered. And I finally did it, traversing various parts of Portland to do so. And I do it all for you. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for supporting this series, for supporting my channel, for supporting me. And if you haven't done it yet or you want to support me further, remember to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon. I'm always posting new stuff there. Trying to post there multiple times a week, various different types of content that you can only get if you sign up to support my Patreon. Even if you can only give $1, that'll give you access to all this stuff, and you will have my unbridled appreciation. I don't know why I started like choking myself when I said that. Just a multitude of different ways you can help me grow. And the link to my Patreon is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Instagram, Facebook, my TikTok, and my Reddit subreddit pages. And all that said, from now Southwest Portland, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.